This receipt was printed 3 days after the first U.S. bomb hit Tehran. The price hadn't moved yet, but economists already knew it was about to. The man who printed this receipt, let's call him Mark, lives 41 miles outside Columbus, Ohio. He drives a Ford F-150. He fills up twice a week. He saw the headlines on Saturday morning. U.S. and Israel strike Iran. And like most Americans, he filed it away as a foreign policy story, a military story, a story for people in Washington, not people in Ohio. He didn't think it was a story about him. Not yet. By the time you finish watching this, you'll understand exactly how a military strike 7,000 miles away becomes a line item in your monthly budget. You'll understand the mechanism, the actual gears, and you'll understand why the people who set this in motion already knew what it would cost you and decided the trade-off was worth it on your behalf, without asking. Saturday, February 28th, 2026. Most of America was asleep. The Super Bowl hangover had barely cleared. And somewhere over the Persian Gulf, more than 100 warplanes were airborne. The United States and Israel launched what would become the most consequential American military operation in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, the aircraft that can fly from Missouri to Tehran and back without being detected, dropped massive ordnance penetrators, 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs, engineered specifically to drill through hardened underground rock and detonate deep inside Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities. Simultaneously, U.S. Navy destroyers in the Arabian Sea launched cruise missile barrages. Israeli F-35s stripped away Iran's air defense infrastructure. Strike targets: Tehran, Isfahan, the deeply buried Fordow facility, Qom, Karaj, Kermanshah. Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. Iran's air defense network was largely neutralized in the first cycle. And President Trump, addressing the nation from the Oval Office before dawn Eastern Time, declared the opening phase a success, while simultaneously warning that the campaign was just beginning and could last, in his own words, 4 to 5 weeks. Iran did not absorb this quietly. Within hours of the initial strikes, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched retaliatory missile salvos across the entire region simultaneously. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest U.S. military installation in the Middle East, was struck. Ali Salem Air Base in Kuwait, the U.S. Fifth Fleet Command in Bahrain, Al Dhafra in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel. And then Iran activated the one weapon in its arsenal that doesn't require a nuclear warhead. The IRGC broadcast on international maritime frequencies, the channels every commercial ship in the region monitors around the clock. Attention all ships. Navigation through the Strait of Hormuz is henceforth forbidden. 5 oil tankers were immediately attacked. Over 150 vessels anchored and stopped moving. And the 33-mile-wide bottleneck that supplies 1/5 of all the oil consumed on Earth went dark. By the time the New York Stock Exchange opened Monday morning, crude oil futures had already risen 15% from Friday's close. The Dow dropped 800 points in the first hour, and the gas station on the corner of Mark Street still showed $3.09 per gallon, because the tankers that would eventually replenish that station's supply were sitting motionless under the crosshairs of Iranian anti-ship missiles. The machine was already moving. Mark just hadn't felt it yet. To understand why a military strike 7,000 miles away shows up in your driveway, you need to understand one body of water, not metaphorically, mechanically, because the Strait of Hormuz is not a geopolitical abstraction. It is the actual physical plumbing that carries the world's fuel supply. And right now, someone has their hand on the shutoff valve. The strait connects the Persian Gulf, where Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, and Iran all pump their oil, to the Gulf of Oman and then the open ocean, 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. The actual shipping lanes are tighter than that. 2 lanes of traffic, each 2 miles wide, with a 2-mile buffer. And through those lanes, 15 to 20 supertankers transit every single day, each one carrying approximately 2 million barrels of crude oil every day. Altogether, 20 to 21 million barrels of crude and petroleum products flowing through every 24 hours. That is 20 to 30% of all globally traded oil and liquefied natural gas. Saudi Arabia's exports, Iraq's exports, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, all of them depend on this passage. The major pipeline bypass, Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, carries roughly 2.5 million barrels per day at full capacity. That covers about 10% of the strait's volume. The other 90% has to go through the water, through that narrow corridor, past Iran's coastline. Iran has known this for 40 years. The IRGC has spent billions building a doctrine they call asymmetric naval warfare, fast attack speedboats, anti-ship missiles with ranges of over 200 miles, naval mine capabilities, midget submarines. None of this is designed to defeat the United States Navy in a conventional engagement. The US Navy would win that fight in hours. That's not the point. The point is, you don't need to win the naval battle. You just need to make the strait too dangerous for commercial shipping. You need insurance premiums on tanker hulls to spike high enough that shipping companies voluntarily reroute. You need oil markets to believe that supply might be disrupted, because in commodity markets, belief is enough. A director at the International Crisis Group explained it this way. Closure of the Strait of Hormuz would disrupt approximately a fifth of globally traded oil overnight. Prices wouldn't merely spike. They would surge violently upward, driven by fear alone. That shock would resonate beyond energy markets, tightening financial conditions, spurring inflation, pushing fragile economies toward recession within weeks. That is not a worst-case fringe scenario. That is the baseline. That is what is currently unfolding. And what is currently unfolding has a very specific, very measurable effect on the balance in your checking account. Most Americans assume that because the US now produces more oil than any country in the history of the planet, we're somehow insulated from Middle Eastern disruptions. That if we pump it here, it stays here, and prices here stay lower. This belief is sincere. It is also wrong. And the misunderstanding is costing you money you don't realize you're losing. Here's why. Step 1. Crude oil is a global commodity priced on global exchanges. Brent crude is the international benchmark, traded in London. West Texas Intermediate is the American benchmark, traded in New York. When you buy oil futures on those exchanges, you are not buying American oil or Saudi oil or Iraqi oil. You are buying oil. The price is global. If a disruption occurs in the Persian Gulf, the price adjusts globally, including in New York, including for the West Texas crude sitting under a well in the Permian Basin. Step 2. American oil companies are not public utilities. They are publicly traded corporations with shareholders, quarterly earnings obligations, and fiduciary duties to maximize profit. When global crude prices rise to $90 a barrel, ExxonMobil is not selling its Texas crude to American refineries at $60. They sell at market price. They export what they can. They profit from the crisis just like every other producer. Consider 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine. Oil spiked. Gas in America hit $5 a gallon in many markets. American families were cutting grocery budgets and canceling vacations. That same year, ExxonMobil posted $55.7 billion in annual profit, the largest in the company's 140-year history. Chevron had its best year on record too. Shell, BP, Total Energies, all of them printed money, while American consumers bled. That is not a coincidence. That is the system working exactly as designed. A global commodity market that protects producer margins and transfers disruption costs directly to consumers. Step 3. The refinery. A refinery buys crude on the open market. When crude goes up, the cost of producing gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and heating oil goes up. Refining margins in the US are thin, intensely competitive, typically 4 to 8 cents per gallon of finished product. They cannot absorb a 15 or 20% jump in crude input costs. They pass it to the distributor. The distributor passes it to the retailer. And the independently owned gas station, operating on about 8 to 10 cents of margin per gallon, has exactly zero ability to absorb a 20-cent wholesale spike, so they pass it to you, and you absorb it at the pump. Here's where we are right now, in real numbers. On March 2nd, 2026, 4 days after the strikes, the national average for regular unleaded crossed $3 per gallon. By Tuesday, March 3rd, chokepoint reported the average at $3.11 per gallon. That's an 11-cent overnight jump. The single largest single-day increase since March 2022. GasBuddy's head of petroleum analysis, Patrick DeHaan, said prices are tracking toward $3.25 to $3.50 nationally within weeks. Tom Closa at Gulf Oil agrees, and says the western United States, where state taxes are higher and prices already run 60 to 80 cents above the national average, will push past $4 well before the national average catches up. And this is the conservative scenario. This is assuming the strait reopens relatively quickly. This is before we model what happens if it doesn't. Trump said 4 to 5 weeks. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, when pressed on rising gas prices this week, acknowledged that the administration anticipated price increases. Trump told reporters Tuesday that higher prices would be temporary and would fall before you know it. Republican lawmakers echoed the line, short-term pain, long-term gain. Democrats immediately pointed to the pump. Here is what the economic models actually say, not the political talking points, the commodity analyst projections. Scenario 1. The Strait disruption lasts under 2 weeks. Markets absorb it. Prices spike, we've already seen that, then partially retrace as traders bet on resolution. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve provides a buffer. Consumer pain is real but bounded. Gas stays somewhere in the $3.25 to $3.50 range nationally. Scenario 2. The disruption lasts 3 to 4 weeks. Global supply deficits begin to compound. The SPR, already significantly drawn down from the emergency 2022 Biden-era release, with replenishment slower than projected, becomes insufficient to bridge the gap alone. Brent crude reaches $90 to $100 per barrel. Gas in America, $3.75 to $4.25 nationally. Diesel surcharges begin flowing visibly through shipping costs into retail prices. Scenario 3. The strait closure extends beyond 4 to 6 weeks, and Iran makes good on its threat to target energy infrastructure in neighboring Gulf states. Saudi Aramco facilities, UAE export terminals, Iraqi pipelines. Saudi Arabia's output is compromised. Iraq's output is compromised. The UAE's output is compromised. At that point, analysts at Capital Economics say crude oil at $100 per barrel would add 0.6% to global inflation on top of whatever baseline already exists. Bank of America has modeled a $40 to $80 per barrel premium from a prolonged closure alone. The last time oil was at $140 a barrel was mid-2008. The financial crisis was already building. The average American family was spending nearly $500 a month on gasoline alone. Some households were choosing between filling the tank and filling the refrigerator. That is not historical color. That is a documented economic consequence. And the mechanism that produced it is the same mechanism humming right now, 5 days into a conflict, with a 4 to 5 week projected duration. And here is where the Federal Reserve enters the story, because this is the part that is not getting enough attention. For the past 18 months, the Trump administration has been publicly and aggressively pressuring the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. The core argument: inflation has been tamed. The economy needs cheaper money to grow. Lower rates mean cheaper mortgages, cheaper car loans, cheaper business borrowing, cheaper refinancing. The Fed had begun a slow rate-cutting cycle in 2024, and further cuts were expected in 2026. That calculus is now in serious jeopardy. CNBC's headline on March 2, 2026. Put it plainly, as Trump declares inflation tamed, Iran conflict threatens new price pressures. This is not editorializing. This is the market's honest read of the situation. The Federal Reserve's mandate is price stability. If energy-driven inflation begins pushing the consumer price index higher, the Fed cannot cut rates. Cutting rates into rising inflation risks making it worse. So instead of your mortgage rate coming down, instead of your car loan getting cheaper, instead of the credit card APR you've been carrying since 2023 finally easing, rates stay elevated. Or they don't move. Or, in the worst supply shock scenario, the discussion quietly shifts back to whether rates need to go up. This is what economists call a supply shock. And supply shocks are the hardest economic problem to solve, because the tool that fights inflation, higher rates, cannot fix the underlying cause. You cannot lower the price of oil by making mortgages more expensive. You can only slow the economy, put people out of work, and wait for the supply disruption to resolve itself. The Fed gets to choose between bad and worse. And either way, the person sitting at the kitchen table doing the math is you. Let's put this in your driveway. Not in barrels per day, not in futures prices or basis points. In the actual numbers from your actual life. Starting right now, in the week of March 5th, 2026. If you drive an average American vehicle, a 14-gallon tank filled twice a week, here is what the current trajectory costs you in cold numbers. At 20 cents per gallon above your pre-war baseline, which is where we are right now, you're paying an extra $5.60 per fill-up. Twice a week. That's $11.20 per week. Approximately $45 per month. $540 per year if the price stays exactly here. And it is not going to stay exactly here. If prices reach $3.50 per gallon, which GasBuddy and Gulf Oil both project as a near-term base case, you're looking at approximately $115 per month above your current baseline, nearly $1,400 per year. If you live in California, Oregon, or Washington, where gas already runs 60 to 80 cents above the national average due to state taxes and cleaner fuel mandates. Add 40% to those numbers. If oil reaches $100 a barrel, the scenario analysts call prolonged disruption. Gas in America likely crosses $4 nationally. California would be above $5 again. In that scenario, you are spending approximately $225 more per month just on gasoline, compared to where you were on February 27th. And then it doesn't stop at the gas station. It never does. Oil is not just what goes into your tank. Oil is the substrate of the American economy. It's in the fertilizer that grew the wheat in your cereal box. It's in the plastic packaging that sealed it. It's in the diesel fuel that powered the truck that drove it 600 miles to your supermarket. It's in the heating oil keeping the warehouse warm where it sat before that truck arrived. It's in the synthetic fibers in the clothes on your back. It is everywhere in your life, so quietly embedded that you only notice it when its price changes. And right now, its price is changing. Economists call this energy pass-through. When energy costs rise, the cost of producing and transporting nearly everything else rises with it. The transmission lag is approximately 60 to 90 days, meaning the strikes happened February 28th. The supply chain disruption begins showing up in your grocery receipt sometime in May. We have a recent data point for exactly this scenario. In February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Oil prices spiked, not as dramatically as what we're seeing now, but meaningfully. Within 90 days, American grocery inflation was running at 8 to 10% annually. Not because food was scarce in America, but because energy runs through every link in the agricultural and distribution supply chain. A 10% increase in diesel costs flows into grocery prices as a 2 to 3% increase within a quarter. Multiply that across a basket of goods: meat, dairy, produce, grain products, packaged foods, and for a family of 4 spending $900 a month on groceries. A 3% increase is $27 a month. A 5% increase is $45 a month, compounded monthly, on top of the gas hit, on top of the mortgage that won't drop. And here's the political and financial context that makes this especially sharp. Grocery prices in America are already 20% higher in 2026 than they were in 2021. 5 years of compounded food inflation has already burned through household reserves for tens of millions of American families. Wage growth has been real but uneven, strong at the top of the income ladder, modest in the middle, insufficient at the bottom. The average American family carries nearly $6,000 in credit card debt, at an average interest rate above 20%. There is almost no financial cushion left to absorb another cost surge without something else giving way. Something like a vacation that gets canceled, a home repair that gets deferred, a retirement contribution that gets temporarily paused, a kid's extracurricular that quietly gets dropped. These are not dramatic choices. They don't make the news. But they are how energy crises actually live in the American household. Not in a single catastrophic moment, but in 1,000 small compressions, applied slowly over months. And then there is the consumer that doesn't drive a 14-gallon car. There are 38 million Americans who live in rural communities. Communities where there is no subway, no bus line, no rideshare coverage worth relying on, where driving is not a lifestyle choice. It is the only mechanism for getting to work, to the doctor, to the grocery store. For these Americans, the gas price is not an annoyance. It is a tax they cannot vote away and cannot opt out of. It is applied to them by a commodity market in New York, responding to a military decision made in Washington about a nuclear facility in Iran. The distance between those two things is the distance between power and the people who live downstream of it. Here's the part of this story that most people, even financially literate people, don't fully sit with. The economic consequences of this strike were not a surprise. Not to the administration, not to the intelligence community, and certainly not to the institutional investors and commodity funds that were watching the same threat signals everyone in Washington was watching. In the weeks before February 28th, oil futures trading volume was quietly elevated. Options bets on higher crude prices, particularly short-dated contracts expiring in March, were accumulating at a pace that commodity analysts publicly noted as unusual. Hedge funds were building long positions in crude gasoline futures and energy sector equities. This was not secret. It was reported in the financial press. The market was, in its own opaque way, pricing in a military event, quietly, before the bombs fell. The people who benefited from the price spike on March 2nd and 3rd were not average Americans. They were the pension funds, hedge funds, and sovereign wealth vehicles sophisticated enough to read geopolitical signals and translate them into commodity exposure before the news cycle caught up. Goldman Sachs commodity desks, Citadel, the energy arms of major institutional investors. They were already positioned. Meanwhile, Mark from Ohio, who has his $43.29 receipt sitting in a cup holder, had zero advance notice, no position to hedge with, no mechanism to protect himself from a policy decision that will now quietly drain his household budget for months. He will lose money on this war, and he will never appear in any accounting of the war's costs. He won't be listed as a casualty. He won't be counted in any budget. He will simply find himself, in May or June, wondering why his paycheck doesn't seem to stretch as far as it did in January. Secretary Rubio this week acknowledged that price increases had been anticipated. Trump told reporters the increase would be temporary, a word that has been used to describe inflation in this country at every major price surge for the past 5 years. It was temporary in 2021 when supply chains broke. It was temporary in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. It was temporary in 2023 when food prices surged. And it is temporary again now. The word has been used so many times that it has been hollowed out. What it means, in practice, is the pain is real. We are not going to compensate you for it, but we believe the strategic objective justifies it. NBC News reported on March 4th that internal Republican polling already shows growing voter frustration. The economic gains that Trump has cited as core political achievements, taming inflation, strong job numbers, rising wages, are now being complicated in real time by a military operation his own administration has confirmed was anticipated to raise prices. The NBC headline was blunt. Iran strikes risk more voter frustration on the economy with rising gas prices. USA Today went to actual Americans. Too expensive. Americans fret over gas prices as Iran war widens. These are not partisan framings. They are the documented, reported responses of ordinary people encountering a foreign policy decision at the pump. It's the oldest political feedback loop in modern American history. The war on television, the cost at the gas station, the 1973 oil shock turned a foreign conflict into a domestic economic crisis within months. The 1990 Gulf War spiked oil and accelerated the 1991 recession. The 2003 Iraq War and its aftermath contributed to the energy price environment that preceded 2008. Every time, the same transmission mechanism. Every time, the same surprised look on the face of the person at the pump. And here is something genuinely counterintuitive. The kind of fact that stops you mid-sentence. CNN reported on March 4th, if not for the American shale oil boom and record U.S. production levels, we would already be past $4 a gallon nationally. American production is, in this specific crisis, functioning as a genuine partial buffer. It is not insulation from the price, but it is a brake on how fast that price rises. Without it, this conversation would already be about $5 gas, not $3.50. Which means that the same deregulated, profit-maximizing American energy sector that prints record profits during price spikes is simultaneously, and perhaps accidentally, the only thing preventing this crisis from being dramatically worse. It is a tension the system was never designed to resolve. It simply lives with it. And so do you. The receipt in Mark's cup holder is dated March 2nd, 2026, 3 days after the first U.S. bomb hit Tehran. The price hadn't moved yet, but economists already knew it was about to, because they understood the mechanism, the strait, the futures market, the refinery margin, the energy pass-through, the Federal Reserve's impossible position, the compounding of costs on a household already carrying the full weight of 5 years of inflation. Understanding the mechanism doesn't protect you from it, but it does something more useful. It removes the confusion, tells you clearly, this was not an accident. It was not bad luck. It was not a supply chain disruption nobody could have predicted. It was a predictable consequence of a deliberate decision, one that was made with full knowledge of what it would cost, and one whose costs, unlike its benefits, are not distributed evenly. The people who made this decision have government-subsidized vehicles, government fuel budgets, and government salaries insulated from consumer price indices. The people who are paying for it are the ones filling 14-gallon tanks twice a week, watching the pump tick, doing the invisible arithmetic of what they can no longer afford. The cost was always going to land somewhere. It always lands in the same place. The price that receipt shows is already out of date, and if the past is any guide, 1973, 1990, 2008, 2022, it's going to get further from the truth before it gets closer to it again. The question isn't whether you'll pay for this war. You already are. The question is how long the campaign lasts, and whether the strait reopens before the price on that receipt becomes something that changes how you live. If you made it this far, you already think differently about this than most people do. The topics on this channel aren't about quick wins or market predictions. They're about understanding the systems that quietly shape your financial life, so you can stop being surprised by them. If that's the kind of content you want more of, subscribing takes 2 seconds. I'll see you in the next video.